Hey guys, welcome to a new episode in the L24 engine rebuild series. And this one's going to be pretty interesting because I finally got a chance to assemble the engine. And the environment here will look a little bit unfamiliar if you've been watching the videos. This is actually the machine shop, engine shop, whatever you want to call it, that did my engine work. And as you know, I'm friends with the owner of this shop. And he graciously offered to have me come in and assemble the engine under his guidance and with his tools and equipment and everything like that, which is an incredible opportunity. I'm super grateful for that. So yeah, of course I came in and got ready to do this with him. And it was a really great learning experience. And I'm trying to do this stuff right after I worked with him, just so I can try to pass on as much of the knowledge as possible to you guys watching this video here. So the engine shop here is 955 Automotive in Erie, Pennsylvania. And as you'll probably be able to tell by looking around some of these videos, they primarily do American V8 engines. They actually support a lot of racing applications, so it was definitely an unusual engine for him to do, but he's genuinely an expert, so I don't think it was difficult by any means. So he had me start by prepping the interior of the block here on all the different surfaces that were worked on. This was hot tanked, and they did put some kind of preservation fluid on it. I would imagine some kind of oil-based something or other. That left kind of like an orange residue. So obviously that has to be cleaned off. And, you know, we're assembling the engine. So this is kind of the last opportunity to get these surfaces really clean and free of any kind of debris. One thing to note here is that we actually did not have to bore out the cylinders at all and use oversized pistons. I asked Jason, and it is pretty rare for an engine of this age to not require it. But this must not have gotten used that much. So we kind of lucked out there. So then I went and inserted the bearings one by one using this technique you'll kind of see here, where you get the one side started and you hold it with your finger, and then you push in the other side. And the same procedure follows for these larger bearings, like the thrust bearing in the middle. And just make sure you're cleaning these with some form of solvent before you insert them into the engine. So like everything else, the next step is to clean up the crankshaft a little bit with some solvent and prepare to insert it into the engine. And then I took some engine assembly lube and liberally applied it to all of the bearings. Obviously a super important part of engine assembly. So the next step I found to be pretty exciting, to actually get to drop the crankshaft in the engine and have it drop in there and rotate it a little bit. And that was kind of cool because, you know, obviously these engines are built with precision originally, you know, by great engineering, and the engine shop that worked on this did great work. So, you know, of course this is what's going to happen, but it's just really exciting to kind of see how easily it glides when you turn it by hand. With fresh lubricant after being machined and everything. So that was really cool. So I wish I would have taken some better video of this, but I did want to be respectful of Jason's time and not be more focused on the camera than I was in getting the right instruction from him. What he's checking is called the thrust clearance. And you can see Jason at this point has installed the thrust bearing cap and to secure the crankshaft in place. And he's checking this thrust clearance, which means kind of when you pull in those counterweights, how much does the crankshaft wiggle back and forth? You know, obviously there's a tiny amount kind of within tolerance that you're allowed to be. And the statistic is available in the metric is available in the Nissan service manual, but he's just verifying here to make sure that we're within that spec and that we are safe to proceed. And we were good to go, so we can move on to the rest of the main bearings. So the next step was for me to install the rest of the main bearing caps, which I did by first installing the bearings using the same procedure we used before, where you would put in the one end and then push the other side down in there and just ensure that they're even on both sides. You can kind of push them one way or the other to even them out. And then I can put the main bearing cap in kind of roughly by hand, and we're going to next lubricate the threads, of course, first, and then insert the bolts, and then we want to use them as a guide so that when they're in there and we take the hammer and hammer it down a little bit, the bolts are already in place, you know, a few threads, so that when we hammer down, it goes directly down, and there's no play one way or the other. And at that point, you can just thread the bolts in the rest of the way, obviously by hand, because we're going to torque these down all at the end. So then we moved on to torquing down the bearing caps, and I got to use Jason's handy-dandy $600 Snap-on torque wrench, which was pretty cool to use that caliber of machinery. It's a digital torque wrench, and it has a scale. You can see the LEDs light up. Obviously it beeps when you get to 40, which is what we were torquing these down to. And as far as the order goes, obviously the thrust bearing was torqued down first, and then we worked our way outwards. So you can see I did the one to the left of it here, and then I moved on to the one over to the right, and did that just going from the center out. And just to be safe, Jason had me go through and make sure that I torqued everything down. So you just go through one by one and check it and make sure you get the beep without over torquing the bolt, which happened to me a couple times. And of course, at this point, you want to go and spin the crankshaft a little bit and make sure that everything still spins freely. And again, I found this super just satisfying just to see everything, how easy it spins when it's all together and done well. So that was exciting again. With the crankshaft safely in place, we flipped the engine back over. You can see that I was a critical part of that operation. So then Jason checked the piston ring gap by pushing down the piston to that level where you can see at that ridge and ensuring it's flat. And then he can use his gauge here and verify the distance here and make sure that we're within spec according to the factory service manual. So Jason made sure that he installed the piston rings for me. Just has a little bit better trained hand at that. Obviously, there's always a fear of breaking the piston rings, and I only bought one set, so that would have been a real day ruiner if we broke some piston rings, considering I have to travel to do this. But yeah, so he got everything there, and there's also an orientation that you need to follow for the piston rings, and I won't comment on that because I don't quite know that. That's something I would suggest that you consult your factory service manual or that book that I recommended at the beginning of the series of how to rebuild Datsun Nissan L Series engines. So at this point, we were ready to install the pistons, and you can see Jason did the first couple here that are in, and then I worked on this one. And the first step is to use the engine assembly lube and apply it around the edge of the piston very liberally. It's almost impossible to use too much, as I found out. Make sure you coat every single surface there, including where the piston rings are. And then you just kind of put it in place before you can use the piston ring compressor. So with the piston ring compressor on it and where it's evenly grabbing around it, you want to use the butt of your soft hammer and make sure that the piston ring compressor is kind of flush with the deck. So you can see I sort of hammered around the edge of it a little bit, and then you can push down the piston with the same end of the hammer. But you want to maintain that flushness on the block so it goes down evenly. So with that piston in place, you can rotate the engine back over. And as you can see, this is a two-person job where I'm slowly hammering up the piston, and Jason is guiding it up to the crankshaft so that it fits right there, and we can install the rod bearing caps. You can also see here that the rod bearings were pre-installed. Of course, be certain to apply engine assembly lube to the rod bearing caps and reinstall the nuts that secure the rod bearing caps back into place. At this point, it's helpful to have something that you can turn the crankshaft with so we can get the rods up to the point where, they're easy to access and we can torque them down. We use this thing. I don't know what this is for, but it worked. But you can use the flywheel pulley bolt that I think it's like 26 millimeter bolts. That'll work just fine. And for these, we torqued these from outside to in. And same as before, we want to go through and check each of these. Jason worked the crankshaft and brought the bolts up for me, and I finished torquing them, and that was the block assembled. I will be coming back in to film a future video where we assemble the cylinder head and install it on the block, and then I can take it back home to Maryland. The next day, we realized we didn't have enough parts, so I was just there cleaning some parts and taking advantage of the parts watcher and discussing with them what our next steps would be. Of course, I was hoping to take this home with me to Maryland after this, but I think it's best, especially because I know some people are using this to guide their own engine rebuild, to make sure that we do it and we have the professional advice rather than me at home. I'm so grateful for Jason's offer to help me with this. I'm really learning a lot, and I hope that this is kind of getting passed along in these videos. But yeah, I'm really excited for the next one to get this assembled. Honestly, I'm just really excited to paint the block. It's very immature, but that is the only thing I can think of sometimes. But yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting to finish this up. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.